got a lot of books on the desk here with me. Anybody else feel like you have been put in some out-of-the-way place by God and you're not really sure what you're there for? Well, we're going to talk about Frank Laubach today. Frank Laubach was a Methodist missionary to the Philippines in his early life, and the Philippines are islands spread out all over the place, and he got put on one of those islands, and if you're on an island, you don't get to those other islands very easily, so he was rather isolated. He had this group of people that he was supposed to talk to about Jesus, see if they were interested, but well, for a while they weren't very interested, and he was kind of uncertain about what he was doing there. He started to, not because he thought he was going to be big and famous and write books about it, but he started to interact with God on a hour-by-hour, minute-by-minute basis, and it was kind of an experiment just to sort of get himself out of the sort of rut, I guess, that he was in, and it went really well. And he did write a book about it, and he wrote some books about some other things. He even taught people to read books. We started this literacy movement to teach the masses in our world to read, and found a method that helped people do that, and then eventually was influential in American politics, and all that from living on an isolated island in the Pacific Ocean. I don't know what you would call that there. Hey everybody, welcome to the Sanctus Forum. I am Michael Stewart Robb, better known as Mike, and we're doing conspiracy commentaries today, talking about Dallas Willard's The Divine Conspiracy, Chapter 1, a section here called God's Redemption of Our Rule. Let me get the title correctly. No, just Redemption of Our, emphasis on our rule. And most of it is about Frank Laubach, so I really can't avoid talking about him. Dallas wrote one of his first writings in Western spirituality was for this book, Christian Spirituality. It's basically an introduction to a bunch of books in Western spirituality, and Dallas wrote, it's the only one that he wrote in this book on Frank Laubach, and he had the choice to write about a number of different people. I've seen the notes actually for this book, and you can kind of see Dallas sort of just trying to decide who he's going to write about, and he picked Frank Laubach. You can also find that piece in this, The Great Omission, a bunch of short pieces by Dallas Willard, and I think if you know the lives of these two men, you can really see how Dallas modeled his life after Frank Laubach's. And this idea that most of us know from Frank Laubach or from Brother Lawrence of turning your mind to God as often as possible, praying unceasingly by turning your mind to God all the time. That's something that Dallas tried to do, kind of modeling himself after Frank Laubach. It enabled him to do other things in his life that he wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Speaking of doing other things, have just started this book by Frank Laubach called Channels of Spiritual Power. And you kind of get the idea just from the title. I'm only in the first chapter where he's talking about, it's written in the 1950s, so he's talking about the threat of communism or of nuclear world wars or that kind of thing. People rather scared about that. We're not so scared about that anymore today. But Frank Laubach had this idea that God would meet us there where we are in our place. And we've been talking about our kingdom in these past two messages, and I think there's a point to talk about our kingdom, which is what we're in charge of now, but also a little more broadly to talk about our place. And we may be in charge of not very much, but there's also the question of where we're in charge of that. So, what's the weather, what's the climate like where you are? Or who are your neighbors? What other kingdoms do you rub up against? That's obviously people in the same household as you, but also the sort of people that you're likely to meet on the street or in your line of work. Like I was saying at the beginning, Frank Laubach, when he started to develop this idea, or maybe rediscover this idea of being in contact with God, did not think he was in charge of a whole lot, so very small kingdom, and he thought his place was rather isolated. And I don't really know when Dallas started to read Frank Laubach, but I do know that Dallas went through a number of times of really feeling rather lonely and isolated, and like he wasn't really in charge of a whole lot. And I think I should maybe say right here at the beginning that for Dallas Willard and for Frank Laubach, you do see in their lives how they are swept into something so much larger than them, and they become they are put in charge of a whole lot more. And that may not happen for most of us. And that's really okay. At least Dallas Willard says that a lot of that will happen for us after we die. Okay? So don't get too caught up on this sort of rags to riches story. The whole idea is that we are going to be responsible in the here and now, and then that's going to be an important training ground for what comes later. Now, there are three things I wanted to talk about here about Frank Laubach, and I've written them down so I don't forget. The first thing is this idea of prayer, that we are going to not just have specific prayer times, but we are going to try to integrate prayer into our life at all times. The second thing is this idea that Jesus is alive and well. And that's something that really comes through if you start to read Frank Laubach's other writings, that we're not just praying to God kind of on our own and God sort of sits up there and sort of listens and says, okay, yeah, great. But we are inviting Jesus into our space. We are inviting him into our kingdom, into our place, and we are letting him work there, right? And he is going to cooperate with us. I mean, this is really starting to sound like Dallas Willard. And then the third thing is this distinction between our kingdom and our place. So kingdom being what we're in charge of, place being where our kingdom is located in the world. God invites us individually to be faithful to him in the little we truly have say over. So that's kingdom. And then he says that we discover the effectiveness of his rule with us precisely in the details of day-to-day existence. So that's our place. That's where we've been put, and that's where our kingdom will be redeemed, to use a Bible-y word. What I would really like to know is if anybody has read anything by Frank Laubach other than Game with Minutes or Letters by a Modern Mystic, these ones that talk about his method of prayer. Anything else? He wrote 50 books or something like that. Has anybody read any of those books? Well, thanks for watching, and thanks for liking this video if you do like it, and for subscribing if you're watching and paying attention here. And I will see you in another one of these. Do check out Sanctus.Institute. Not a very great website, but it does have a link to, not really a link, but you can sign up for our almost monthly newsletter there. So see you then. Bye.